5, 4, 3, 2, 1. What's up, everyone? Welcome to Simulation. We are now featuring Nicholas Paul Brysiewicz. How's it going, man?
It's going really well. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.
We have a lot to talk about.
That we do.
And I'm really excited because I think our minds think in this cosmic perspective, in this evolutionary timeline, in this how do we design civilization moving forward. And that's what you do right now. You're with the Director of Development at the Long Now Foundation.
Correct, yeah.
2 years now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Give us a little scoop on what Long Now's up to.
Oh, well, right now, I mean, Long Now's been around since 1996. It was started around this project called the Clock of the Long Now that you may have heard about. It's the 10,000-year clock in the desert in West Texas. It was started by Danny Hillis, who's now over at MIT. And Danny had this idea of building a clock that was going to keep perfect time for the next 10,000 years as a symbol for the future, the same way that the pyramids of Giza are a symbol for the past. In 96, a lot of technologists who grew up with the year 2000 being this kind of landing place for your ideas and your projections about what future of civilization is going to be. We knew we were going to blow past that in just another 4 years. So what happens after that? Do we swap it out for the year 3000, the year 2100? Do we pick another token number? What happens? And Danny kind of wanted to get ahead of that and kind of create this, this permission to think in long time scales, kind of these moonshot ideas of saying, you know what, it sounds kind of crazy to build a clock that's going to keep perfect time for 10,000 years. It's not an easy feat. It's not an easy engineering feat. It's not an easy fundraising feat. Nothing about it was like an obvious thing. And so it took a lot of gumption, and they did it, and people kind of glommed onto it. He sent out an email to some of his friends, close people, to see what they thought about the project, and people got really enthusiastic because there's a there, right? Even when I tell people about Long Now in 2018, almost 25 years later, sometimes, there's two kind of buckets of people where you see people, half of them, they don't get it. They're like, okay, that seems cool, whatever. You guys in San Francisco, you guys have the wildest ideas. But then there's the other half of people that they just light up. And you realize right away that you've just struck something they've been kind of thinking about in the back of their mind. And you've just articulated it, and you've told them that you've been building this for them. And so it's a really kind of an amazing experience. It's like the best part of my job, is I get to be, for a lot of people, the person who tells them what we're up to. And then, people get excited about it. And so that clock project is really what kicked off the idea of the Long Now Foundation.
Let's stay on what you just said, and then we'll continue with the train of thought. You just said that you get this pleasure of delivering this message of the Long Now, this sort of this thought process of thinking in the long-term thought, and you get to share with people that, hey, we're doing this. We're helping people with long-term thinking with our projects. Mm-hmm. And then they go, wow, thank you for doing that. That's so important. Tell us a little about, just before you keep going, tell us about that feeling for the other person as you ask them more about what that long-term thinking perspective means to them. Why do they care? Mm-hmm.
Well, I know what that feeling's like because I've been that person, right? At some point, somebody told me about Long Now, and I was like, wait, what? You're building a what and the where and for how long? And oh my God, this is incredible. So I know what that feels like, and when I see it reflected in somebody else, I'm like, there's a lot of empathy there, right? I kind of am taken back to that moment right away. And so I think for a lot of people, it's something maybe they've thought about in the back of their heads. Maybe at some point, late night conversation with a friend, 2 in the morning, you're sitting in the woods, you're sitting in a hot tub somewhere, you're sitting in a hot springs, you're walking down Market Street, in the middle of the night, like we were saying, how quiet it gets. And you had this conversation, you say, what do you think is going to happen in the next 1,000 years, 10,000 years? Are humans still going to be around? What are we going to look like? Are we going to have eyes? Are we going to have friends? Are these archetypal things going to be lasting forever? Like, wow, how is the world going to change? How is it going to stay the same? These are really interesting conversations. And so I think people have touched on it before they ever come to Long Now. I mean, these people that are lighting up, I think they're lighting up because same way you'd recognize a friend. You're like, oh, I've had this conversation. You guys just have this conversation? That's amazing. And so the first move is...
An organization based on that conversation.
Yeah, so the first move seems to be one of just like, excitement that this is a thing. And then there's a couple of questions. And then it usually lands with like, so how can I How can I get involved? How can I be a part of this? And that's kind of what's cool about Long Now too, is it's been opened up so that people can come and contribute ideas and kind of share what their thoughts are. We're still finding ways of doing this, but the general idea for Long Now is not to be a dogmatic institution that says, this is how you think long term. We're not a think tank publishing white papers right now where we say, okay, this is how you do this for long term, this is how you do that for a long time. That's really not what we've been up to. We've been more Socratic. We've been creating opportunities and spaces and experiences for people to ask those questions of each other, of themselves, to have that conversation and say, like, so, what do you think? I'd love to, maybe we can do this on the show, but I'd love to talk to you about what you think is going to happen in the next 10,000 years. What kind of an arc, what kind of a trajectory humanity's on. Because I find this to be the most interesting thing, is not so much having the answer, right? Not so much doing the job so well that it closes up and nobody talks about it anymore is much less interesting to me than opening up a whole new line of inquiry. And then once you get into this space, you can think about just about everything from a long-term perspective, and it really changes the way you look at things. You've got these Kepler posters over here, so you start thinking about interstellar travel and space exploration, and like, whoa. Where are we going to go in the next 10,000 years, right? You start looking at this kind of stuff, you start looking at Benjamin Grant's photos from space, and you start thinking about the technology that we have now. What are we going to do with this technology, and how is that going to change what it means to be human? How is that going to change our relationship to the planet, to the landscapes, to the cities, to the places that we're taking care of? Like, is it going to make us better stewards? Is it going to make us worse stewards? What is our role in this, and what is our responsibility to the next generation? Because as soon as you start thinking in these long time scales, you get hit by that sense of insignificance that some people really are excited about, right? And there's a move there. You have to see yourself in contrast to something like a mountain or something like the pyramids at Giza or maybe the clock of the Long Now to really kind of recognize where you are. But then instead of making you feel smaller and making you feel less agential, there's something to be said for this is giving you permission, saying you're at the beginning of a 10,000-year story. What are you going to do? It's Saturday. What are you going to do, Alan? You've got some ideas, you've got an idea of where you want the world to go for the next 10,000 years, and you have permission to get it started without having the obligation to finish it, because you're in such a long arc that you don't have the responsibility to both kick something off and complete it. You can begin something that's going to take a few generations to finish, right? Projects like Clock of the Long Now, we're coming up on 25 years and it's under construction. It's still being built, right? We won't do this a whole lot. You have the Sagrada Familia and some of these long-term projects, which are amazing. We love kind of collecting these projects and these stories. But there's not a whole lot of incentive in our current modern world for you to take on something that you know you're not going to complete, to take on something and then pass the baton to the next generation and say, not only like, hey, you can finish this, but I trust you to finish it in the way it needs to be finished. You don't have to read my mind. You don't have to go back into history and do it exactly the way I did it. I don't want to constrain the next generation with these. I can pass that baton and say, go for it. I trust you. You're going to do a good job with this. Mm-hmm. So we're trying to do that on a civilizational type, scale. But then there's also these projects that are, attacking different things, different aspects of ways you can think long term. You're into it.
I'm so into it.
Oh, I'm so glad to hear that, man.
I'm so into it. Okay. All right. So when you first have this conversation with somebody, they're usually like, I've had a conversation like this before. There's a whole organization that does stuff like this that's really exciting. And they get more excited. They want to get involved with it. And then you have all these different, I really enjoyed how you're talking about passing the baton off. That's kind of what it felt like. Every single generation is just pass the baton off to the next generation to pick up and continue running forth and building a better world. But we need to know about this time scale in order to better do that, to better have our minds expanded to these new dimensions, these new ways of thinking. And this project, Long Now, what you guys work on has the clock, and you were talking about Danny Hillis and the clocks. This is in Western Texas. And where is this in Western Texas?
It's pretty much right where Texas, New Mexico, and Mexico all come together. It's
Texas,
right over in that area.
New Mexico, and Mexico. Okay, right around there. And then it's built into a mountain.
Yeah.
And then is it a clock that has 0 and then 10 and then 5,000 and then 10,000?
Yeah, no, not quite. The actual face of the clock, and I can't speak in great technical detail about it, but the actual face of the clock is a star field. And it's actually going to, it's a star field, and it actually helps you orient yourself in space. And so that's kind of letting you know what time it is. You know, there's going to be a Gregorian date as well. We use a 10-year date format, the decamillennial date format. So for us, it's the year 2018.
Yeah.
And that, you know, the story behind that was that Danny was doing some modeling for the clock in Excel. It was crashing Excel because he was projecting things out into the year 10,000, and Excel didn't know what to do with it. So now we've kind of adopted it as like a token reminder of like the 10,000 year time frame that we're kind of concerned with. But the clock itself should have, you know, a Gregorian readout, this star field, which is the REIT. And actually, you know, I don't know if I have a business card on me. I would show you what the REIT looks like. Right there on the back, that actually shows, that's helping you kind of orient yourself in that star field. And so astrolabes used to use these to kind of orient people, and so the clock is going to use one of those as well. Yeah, when you get to the clock, it's going to have the last time.
What is this? What is this? What is this?
That's the REIT.
What's a REIT?
Yeah, it's like a guide to reading that field. It's actually letting you know like where the North Star is, for example, showing you where you are in relation to that in the star field. So it's pretty interesting. In fact, like we have for anybody who's interested in learning more about that.
We know nothing.
Yeah, for anybody who's interested in learning more about that, we actually have some stuff on our blog about like REITs, astrolabes, oraries. If you've been to our bar, the Interval here in San Francisco, you've seen the orary, which is that mechanical contraption that shows the positions of all of the human eye visible planets in the solar system, so all 6 of those. And so that was actually taken around to teach people about the heliocentric model of the universe. It was like, oh, here you go. Here, I'll show you a picture of it.
You have a constant positioning of where the other visible planets are in our solar system. You have as in if you're at the interval and then Mars is over here, then and you're looking this way, then you could look outside, go outside and look up in the sky as long as it's over the horizon line, and you could go and see where it is. If the light pollution isn't too bad.
Basically, in a nutshell, yeah. The one at the interval is actually turned off because we had issues with people grabbing onto it, and we had to recalibrate it. And so it's actually unplugged. It's not an accurate representation. Every now and then somebody will go there and line up all the planets or something, and people will be like, "Oh my God, I can't believe that's happening. Is that happening outside right now?" No, it's not. It's not fully functional right now.
Okay, so I mean, we could talk about this, which I know very, very, very little about, nothing about. We could talk about the cosmic field on the face of the clock, which I also don't know anything about. There's so much to learn about that. There's a Gregorian, you said, next to it, so people can see 02018 and be like, oh yeah. I actually really like that In a Nutshell video. Did you see that one? Kurzgesagt, In a Nutshell.
Kurzgesagt, yeah, the Holocene calendar.
The Holocene calendar, yeah.
I bought one of those. Did you buy one of those?
I didn't know.
I had one. I had the 2017 one next to my closet, and it was awesome. Every single day you get to kind of see the year 12,018. It was kind of a cool idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. I think that's actually a pretty cool date format as well.
It puts, again, these first 10,000 years of life, like we can jump, I guess, maybe I'll mention this point, but the first 10,000 years of figuring out how to live on land and grow food on land and slowly build up civilization, those first 10,000 years until today, now we're in 12,018. I really like that format because rather than, oh, civilization is only 2,000 years old, now it's 12,000 years old, it gives you a better idea of where we've really come from. But okay, so I wanted to say these other projects, then we can maybe come back to that. But so the clock of the long now is this, is the importance of seeing civilization on a 10,000 year scale. And then you have the interval, so it's a bar, a meeting place for art and science together. Mm-hmm. And then you have the Rosetta project as well. And so then I guess we can talk about this project because I think this one is over the span of the last 10,000 years, and even quite a bit before that, civilization was developing with all of the different languages that we were using to communicate with each other. Now you were teaching me there's only 7,000 languages left. We lose a language every 14 days, every 2 weeks we lose a language. So the Rosetta Project's trying to log as many of the languages as possible.
Yeah, in part. So the clock, I can kind of tie all this together here in a nice thread, and that's that the clock, was this amazing idea. It was brilliant. Everybody recognized it for being what it was. And Stuart Brand, who's a counterculture figure out here in San Francisco, but he's been involved in so many different projects over the years. It's really kind of fascinating. Stuart Brand got involved and said, there should be a library with the clock. Like, there should be something there, something cultural, something civilizational that we can pass on, pass forward to the next generations. So you think about a library and that makes sense. You go, okay, cool, let's do a library. And then you get into these interesting canonical discussions. So the library that we've been building is at the bar. It's at the interval. It's a floor-to-ceiling library. It's about 3,000 volumes roughly. But the idea is that you're going to build a tightly curated canon that is the books that you would want to have if you had to jumpstart civilization. So what kind of books would you want? You'd want to have Shakespeare. You'd want to have Plato. You'd want to know how to make steel. You want to know how to do penicillin. There's so many things you'd want to do. You want to capture all of that. We have an Oxford English Dictionary up there. There's a Encyclopedia Britannica's up there. It's like all the books that you would, the done thing, right? You would have all these books there. And then the question becomes, well, do you do it in English? We're in an English-speaking country, so that makes sense for us. But and then if you have like Borges, do you do Borges in English? That's the only way I've ever read Borges, but that's not his native language. And so you're starting to get to these interesting canonical conversations, and pretty soon they actually they start to it's kind of what we were talking about earlier about conversations being so interesting, this Socratic thing, this like opening a space and holding a space for us to discuss what we think. Like I think there's room for a really interesting discussion there about what language to include, and so this library also kind of seeds a lot of conversation about the future, what we're going to want, what our responsibilities are to this world and the future generations. So that all kind of came together, and I think we kind of agreed on, well, if you're going to put it in any language, you're going to need a key to get it into the other languages, because you're not going to have a guarantee that somebody who finds the library is going to speak English. And so, let's kind of look at all the languages. And so there's a lot of field work that's been done to collect all these languages, these 7,000 languages. There's field workers all over the globe that are trying to capture that. In fact, Dr. Laura Welcher, who is the director of the Rosetta Project, she was working on Potawatomi, which is an indigenous language here in North America. I think actually back where I'm from, like near the Chicago, Milwaukee area. And so she was doing field work out there to collect some of that stuff. And so all of this gets collected: dictionaries, grammars, Swadesh lists, parallel text translations of Genesis, parallel text translations of the United Declaration of Human Rights. All of this kind of gets compiled into a data corpus. And the question is, how do you save that for 10,000 years? On a 10,000 year time scale, you're going to have to deal with something like a digital dark age. The fact that all these things that we store on hard drives, all these things that we have stored in our computers, those are all going to be ephemeral on a long time scale. And if they're not ephemeral physically because of something like an electromagnetic pulse or a solar flare, they're going to be ephemeral in the sense that they're encoded in such a way that it's difficult to decode them. If you were to give me a CD right now of like your band or something and I wanted to listen to it, I'd probably have to scratch my head and like look around my house and see if I have a disk drive somewhere. So like even just something that's a couple of decades old becomes almost inaccessible within just, a very short time period. So what would you do? So the Rosetta Project started working with Berkeley National Labs, some other folks, to figure out how we could shrink an analog image. So like a screen printed t-shirt. I don't know if you've ever actually done a screen print, but it's awesome. It's a lot of fun. If you can imagine something like that, you want to actually get that analog image just shrunk all the way down. So initially, the initial technology was a focused gallium ion beam that was kind of basically engraving these discs at like a 7 nanometer scale. So each page of language documentation on these nickel discs is about 5 human hairs wide. So you can fit a lot of information on it. The original Rosetta discs, there's like 15,000 pages of language documentation, all on like a 3-inch disc. So that's a good way to store it. A 30x or 60x jeweler's loop, you'll be able to unpack everything that's on there. But again, it seeds these conversations. You'd have to have eyes. Are we going to have eyes in the year 7000? These are interesting conversations. They're questions that experts in the field can unpack and talk about and discuss and stuff. Laura's actually an expert in how we speak to future generations and to extraterrestrial intelligences. So she is on the board of directors for METI, the Messaging to Extraterrestrial Intelligence.
Good, yeah, we're trying to get Doug Bakich on our show as well, yeah.
Yeah, that'd be amazing. And so, it opens up, Dr. Laura Welcher. Yeah. So it kind of opens up these questions. So all of these projects, the clock and then the library and then the Rosetta disk, we're kind of opening more and more questions. We're not closing up boxes and saying, we figured that out, file that away. We're kind of saying, cool, here's another area of inquiry that we can kind of use our minds to unpack and use conversations to unpack together. So that project kind of, that's what's still going on. We're still trying to figure out how do we store all that information, because I joke around that those original Rosetta discs cost quite a bit of money to make. They were very expensive to fabricate. A couple of years ago we made some smaller ones, about a coin sized. that you can actually wear around your neck. And those were a little bit less expensive. The technology's advanced significantly since we started the project. I'd like to think that in my lifetime, that technology will eventually get to the spot where the back of my business card's not going to have a picture of the REIT, but it'll have the entire manual for civilization on the back of it. We'll be able to store all of this information in a way that's easy to decode, and it'll be cheap enough that I can hand them out like business cards. So that's kind of where that project's going, is figuring out new ways to archive information. How are we going to do this for, how are we going to archive and save things on a millennial time scale, and then have conversations to see if we can do that better. So all that kind of comes around to this idea of extinction. You and I were talking about it a little bit earlier when I was having coffee. And that's that, when you're looking at a 10,000 year time scale, the first thing anyone will tell you is that you can't plan for 10,000 years. Nobody can plan for 10,000 years. The only thing you would know about your plan is that it's going to be completely wrong. And so what you want to do on a 10,000 year time scale is actually preserve possibilities for the next generations. Because once something disappears, once something's extinct, like a language, you're living in a world in which you no longer have access to that language. Or if a species goes extinct, you're living in a world in which that's not going to be the case anymore. You don't have mammoths anymore, right? And so that constrains the future. And I think one of the maybe normative claims that we would make would be that preserving possibilities for the future is a good idea, right? Again, there's room for conversation here, and I think like that's something I'd like to see more conversations about. But I think on the whole, you want to trust future generations, and in order to trust them and kind of give them the baton in the best condition you can, you have to give them maximal optionality. You have to give them as many degrees of freedom as possible, because you don't know. Maybe they do want to speak another language. Maybe there's a good reason to do this play or write that poem in this language, right? Languages are fascinating, and I'm not a language nut, but the more and more I've talked to Laura about how an entire worldview can really get captured in the way a language is structured and spoken and shared, it's mind-blowing. And so yeah, making sure that future generations have those. We've got 7,000 around. Let's make sure we still have 7,000 around, accessible, available for people.
Logged.
Yeah, logged. And they've resurrected a couple of languages. I think it's Miami. But there's stories about people who've kind of brought them back. And then to that same end, we're also working with a project called Revive and Restore that Stuart Brand and his wife Ryan Phelan are running, which is trying to bring back the woolly mammoth. That's kind of the mic drop elevator pitches, bringing back the woolly mammoth, but they're also working on a number of other organisms, including the passenger pigeon, black-footed ferret, the great auk. There's a lot of things they're working on using genomic technology to maybe possibly undo some of what's been done, right? So we live in a world without woolly mammoths, and there's certain consequences to that. It actually turns out there's certain climatological consequences, right? Woolly mammoths were good climate change mitigators. And so there's a reason why you'd want to bring them back. They have an ecological function. And so it's going to be interesting to see as that technology progresses, we're having more and more responsibility for our planet. We're being able to look at it and kind of say, oh, wow. I mean, just looking at these photos here, you can see the impact that we've had on the surface of this planet. Like it comes with certain responsibilities, right? Stuart Brand has said, we are as gods and may as well get good at it. I think it's a really good way of capturing this moment in time. When you can bring back woolly mammoths, like, okay. I talk to people all the time who kind of reference Jurassic Park, or they reference like, oh my God, how do you, you're just gonna do this kind of stuff? And it's like, no, that's why you're having a conversation. That's why you're opening up the space for people to discuss this and share their thoughts on it. You kind of learn from people, you open up a space for, there's so much to talk about around each of these projects. So
let's see what we can do with unpacking it.
Yeah.
There were times along the way that I was like, I want to go and unpack that one, and then I want to go and unpack that one. And maybe along the way I'll start doing that a little bit more, because now I have like 4 things to unpack, and it's a lot.
Yeah, okay. Did we cover all the bullet points? I think we did. We got all the way.
Yeah, we did.
Almost.
We got a couple more to go, but yeah, we're exactly, almost. Yeah. So okay, so check this out. As you talk about the manual for civilization, we talk a lot on the show about the importance of the parent helping teach the child, when the child's born into the world, kind of some sort of basic foundational understanding of the world that they live in. And so I think the manual would be a really good thing for the parent to be teaching the child. Hey, this is where we came from, this is who we are, this is where we're going, this is what we're working on, etc. And I'm really happy to hear that there's this manual, and that the manual of, like you were saying, penicillin, optics, electricity, all these different types of things, language, that are really important across other languages, so that way anyone in the world could see like, hey, these are these fundamental things that we would teach in order to start a civilization. And then that led you into the idea of preserving language as well. And then that led into the understanding of extinctions of languages, extinctions of species, and how do we bring back ones that we want to have, because it's interesting to say that we've done it and that we know that how to do it and that this is a way for us to move forward. It's a forward-thinking idea to be able to bring back things that have died in order to be like, hey, we are, like you said, we are in control, we are God, so we may as well start acting like we can figure out how to work together and prosper on this
If there's an
planet.
ecological function, right? A lot of these animals that are gone, they were stewards of an environment and in kind of critical pieces in a kind of a network. And so in
like
those
a tree
cases,
that
yeah.
can sequester an extra carbon or something.
Yeah, it's less than like, let's do it, because then we have, it's not to make light of extinction. It's not let's do it because then we don't have to worry about extinction anymore because we can just bring them back. That's really not like the angle that at least that we're going on for, for this. It's really,
there's some utility behind it.
There's like a balance that can be upset in these ecosystems when a species goes extinct and they had a role, they had like a job to do, right? Kind of like we all have jobs in the economy, right? They had like a job in the economy of their system, and then when they're gone, there are certain situations in which no one moves in to do that. That job's just being undone.
And maybe that's the way that evolution has sort of been on a trajectory, because over the past, I think it's like, what, 90% of all species that have ever existed are extinct now.
Wow, 90%?
Yeah. So but that's the classic. I think it's 90 million species have extinct, and now there's 10 million left or so. I think that's what it is. And that might just be the trajectory. As a species becomes extinct, then the ecosystem changes in that sense. So maybe it is, if we do want to play God, we are going to impact that ecosystem in a way that we're unsure about unless we do some simulation projections and figure out what will happen if we brought that back into the ecosystem. Mm-hmm. But yeah, there's always this purpose behind what you're doing. What would you say is kind of the grand purpose is this long-term thinking, but like the overall purpose of especially like preserving, let's talk about the extinction one, for example. Like, what would you say is like the overall purpose? You were kind of getting into that a little bit.
Yeah, I think restoring ecological function is kind of the idea here. The main takeaway is that there's a role here that we can restore, and if we have the ability to do it.
What would be a role that would be restored in an ecosystem?
Yeah, so here's a good one, right? So the passenger pigeon, we talked about that a little bit. Last passenger pigeon went extinct not that long ago. It was like 1914, right? But these things used to black the sky out. Flocks of passenger pigeons used to be like millions. It's just wild to think about, right? Like I don't even know if I have a model for what that would be like to have a flock of passenger pigeons block out the sun. But this is from the reports we have. This is what happened. And they were kind of like a natural wildfire. So you have so many pigeons coming and descending on trees that the trees are falling over. And then you have all the pigeons returning all of those, all the nitrogen, all the minerals back into the soil. And so you ended up having like this kind of natural wildfire that would move across the plains, and now they're gone. So now you just kind of see the ecosystem kind of adapting, right? And in some ways, it's good. Like you said, like sometimes there's this inexorable, evolution of things, and they're moving on, and like things move on. But there's also a sense in which, again, like if we have the ability to bring it back, and it was doing something really good for that environment, it was promoting biodiversity, or like, there's all these other considerations in that network to look at and say like, oh, what do we really do here? We think we just lost a pigeon, but maybe so much more is happening, right? And so kind of talking about that, discussing that, figuring out what it is we can do, what it is we should do, what kind of timescales we should do it on. There's so many questions there. There are entire conferences where people are just discussing exactly that. How do we do this responsibly? How do we do this efficaciously? And so I love that there's a project in the world in which people are saying we should be talking about this. Mm-hmm. We have a unique leverage point here to kind of maybe not so much undo the damage we've done, but to increase our power to be good stewards of the environment. This is another way in which we can be a good steward. And so if we can do that, what are our responsibilities, and like how do we go about this well?
So we see an ecosystem, there might be a benefit of bringing back the passenger pigeon, so we bring it back and we analyze the way that it impacts the ecosystem, and there might be a couple examples of how we can bring back certain species and augment our ecosystems. Okay. And then and then with language we have we're bringing back languages that have been lost in order to, or we're at least logging the ones that have been lost, or as close to have been lost as possible. We're trying to log them so we can say that, oh yeah, this society developed in this way, and we can tell from their language. It's always interesting, like with the linguistics, and I'm sure that her name was Linda?
Dr. Laura Welcher.
Laura Welcher. I'm sure that she knows of like George Zipf and like Zipf's law on linguistics and the Pareto principle, but it's so interesting how even like historical languages still applied with the Pareto principle still applies to them, that only 20% of the words that are used account for 80% of all of the words used. So like the, of, and, which, to, like those sort of words account for like 80% of all the things you say. And like all the other 80% of words that are like much longer words, or only like 20% of the things that are said, because they're longer, they're used less often. And so it's interesting how civilization still used similar tendencies with our languages, even from the last, throughout evolution. And so by logging that language and by logging the languages we have today as, maybe we should talk about this one. As a language is gone every 14 days, is like, why is that? Is that a tribe of people that were using a language? Either maybe a couple of the ones died off that were the last ones that knew the language, economic and political pressures for them to adapt and learn the language of the country that is now prospering and using a new language, or the newer versions or dialects of it, and that way they stop using that one and there's no one being taught it anymore. So
exactly, all of those are reasons why we're losing the languages. And they are the tail languages, like you said. They're the ones that are only being spoken by a few dozen people, right? Or maybe a few hundred people, or even threatened languages, right? And so for all of those reasons, from feeling pressure, for there being economic or political pressure, and just from age, right? People aren't speaking anymore. The next generation didn't bother to learn it. They were educated in different things. And there's, history's rife with stories of people who, the next generation's educated speaking another language, and it's, there's a violence to it, right? Of like kind of forcing somebody away from their own language, right? Of the way that they've spoken and shared their worldview. So there's a certain humanitarian angle to it as well, preserving these languages. So we are like keeping them safe for the next generation to make decisions, but we're also kind of there's this protection kind of thing where you say, no, like we're kind of taking a stand and saying it's not okay to eliminate languages, right? We're not just gonna like wipe them clean and say like, we don't need it. English is great, works good enough for me, right? There's something very, there's dignity in it, and preserving.
And there's history, There's, one day, we'll look back at the Rosetta Project and we'll see that there was a word that was used to describe a feeling that there is no word in the English language that we use to describe that feeling.
Yeah, so, I can give you an example, actually.
Yeah, do it.
And I'm going to butcher this. Laura's going to kill me because I'm going to butcher this because I don't know exactly what it is. But basically, and I think it's Potawatomi, but again, I'm probably getting some of these details wrong. But I think it's Potawatomi. There's a language in which one can do something, and there's a modifier, right? So we have like modifiers like, I guess, like you have gender modifiers in like French or something, right? Like, or Spanish, right? You have like the male fork or the female knife or whatever. You have these kind of small modifiers. And then like you have like in Italian, you have like isimo for big or something, right? Or like ito in Spanish for little, right? So you have these weird little modifiers you can tag on. And in Potawatomi, they have modifiers for agency. So you can walk like academic walks. You can walk like a toddler walks. You can walk like a rock walks. And so they kind of use this for like poetic effect, for rhetorical effect. It's super interesting. We don't have anything like this in English. There's no way I can take a verb and then kind of like tag something on and then kind of add a whole world of like meaning to what I'm saying.
It'd almost be like, it's kind of like adding a descriptor to a verb. Isn't that kind of an adverb?
Like an adverb kind of, yeah, like a little bit, yeah.
But running is, you would have to use a whole word before running to describe like running in a marathon versus running to an appointment versus running like speed walking.
Totally. We can get around to it and express some of these things, right? That's how we can talk about it. But there's just like this beauty in the economy
rather than a
language
prefix,
there, yeah.
right? It would be like a prefix or something that would
And again,
tell
I don't
you that.
I don't know the details. It could be a suffix, it could be a prefix, it could be like
there's
a
so
phonetic
many
thing.
of these things though
Yes.
that we can dig
Thousands.
and figure out. There are even in, I think we've talked about this on the show before, but in Hindi there's a bunch of different ways to say love.
Oh,
and
cool.
then we only have like love here in the US. It's like love. So even things like that, what kind of love? Ron always jokes around and says that he loves Chinese food. That's what Ron loves.
That's right, and that's it.
That's real love.
I love Chinese food, my
then,
disco
like, what
shoes,
about-
the Pink Floyd album. Yeah.
But like Ron also has a nephew and a niece, and so so then he has a different kind of love for them, right, Ron?
Yeah, I would imagine.
Yeah. So like his so then like but he has to use the same word love for
Yeah.
for two of these different, like food versus humans. Like it's like but there's a different feeling to those things.
So just
Yeah.
using that example and launching off that, that's the feeling of living in a constrained situation.
Yeah.
Where you don't have those other options within arm's reach, right? So we can feel what it feels like to say, there's this thing I want to do, and I can't do it because I'm constrained in a certain way, right? That's the idea of preserving possibilities for the next 10,000 years. That's this idea.
Yeah.
And there's so many different like themes we can take with it, whether it's languages or species or anything. But this idea that like, yeah, you don't want to find yourself in like kind of in a constrained future in which you don't have these options. You want to trust the future to do good work, and you want to give them all the tools you can, right? And that's another Stewart Brand thing, was access to tools, right? The Whole Earth Catalog. This idea was you should have access to great tools.
Yeah.
Someone should tell you where to get good pants. Someone should tell you where to get good glasses for your water. Someone should tell you everything you need to build a piece of furniture. You should know how to get access to those tools. It's important. That's what the internet helps us do,
Yeah.
right? It's access to intellectual tools. It's access to information. And so there's something to this. It's like really important that we recognize, like, it's always better. What is it? A horse, my kingdom for a horse. You never want to be in a situation in which like you're in need of that thing and it's gone. You don't have it. It's really like.
Oh, there's another really good example. Is the George Gilder taught this to us, that you would have a civilization that would go out and fish, and they would go out and fish on their canoes, and they'd go fishing, and then then the generation would die, and their kids would go fish, and their kids would grow up, and then they would die, and their kids would go fishing, and it would just keep happening for like 100 years or something. And then the canoes would break, and then the kids didn't know how to build canoes, because that knowledge, that history, that teachings was gone. They didn't document how to build canoes. They didn't practice augmenting how to build canoes and making them better over time. So I think that this is one of these reasons why it's important to keep it, not only to expand the language and so that we have less of these limitations with trying to describe certain things. We can augment our languages and make them better and include things like feeling. How much feeling can we add to language? But then there's also, like you said, like how do you build a good piece of furniture, or how do you mold a good glass? How do you give a good haircut? How do you write a good novel? How do you, etc. So that retaining that sort of wisdom as well. This kind of makes me feel a little bit like we're trying to retain like a digital ledger of like everything, and it's probably like not that. Like if we had the capacity to retain a digital ledger of everything in something like DNA that was easy to read and write, and that was really small, then that would make sense. Like it's fine, we can totally read and write in DNA and capture everything that's ever existed.
They're working on it.
Yeah, I know,
Yeah.
but at the same time, that's like, I don't really care if you purchased a taco at 2 o'clock on Tuesday, and I don't think civilization needs to keep that in a digital ledger forever.
Yeah, it begs some interesting questions about how we filter culture, right? Because culture is that ledger, it's the sum accumulation of all of our stories, right? So in Western culture, it's the Western stories. It's Shakespeare. It's the Lion King, right? But like, you know, there's other cultures and other stories and other canons of ways they've kind of figured out, how do I pass down to my children and my children's children and children's children's children as economically as possible everything they need to know how to act in the world? Like, that's a really interesting question, and culture's kind of our answer to it. It's less this conscious thing, right? In fact, like, there's something to be really interestingly said about it being an unconscious thing. That like culture, what lasts because it needs to be in the canon. If it was disposable, we'd dispose with it. Like carrying information across millennia's resource intensive. Right? It's not easy like to read all the books. Like as it stands, you and I are never going to read all the books in the Manual for Civilization. It breaks my heart. I walk into work every day, I look at those books, and I just know I am not going to read them all. But we've saved them. And the question is like how? Why? Some books got burned. Some books got banned. And some books you have to read in high school, or you can't graduate high school, right? And so that's kind of how we decide about, you know, how do we teach people to give a good haircut? How do we teach people how to be in love? How do we teach people how to raise a family and find a job and go through despair? Like, we've kind of collected these stories because they're good, they're useful. So that's kind of the cultural question. So yeah, keeping that. It's why it's a genius move to want to keep that with the clock, right? Like you can't just have a clock. It's been, you know, passing a message thousands of years into the future and not offer kind of the payoff. Like, here's the culture. Here's something. You might need this. I don't know. I have no idea what situation you're in, but if things were bad, all of this, it's going to be really helpful. So. Should we talk about the Manual for Civilization in the interval? Because I don't think we talked about the interval yet.
We did a little, but
okay.
I think talking about it more is a great idea. Okay, let's talk about it in this sense. This is a question that we ask on the show a lot. What would be some good foundational principles for a parent to instill into their child?
Oh man, I don't know if I'm an authority on that matter. Certainly wouldn't be speaking ex cathedra for long now, but you know, I think resilience. It's like one of the most important things I think of in general broad categories. Like, how do you go through like near total defeat and actually come out on the other side and be okay, possibly even improve your situation, right? That's a crazy idea. It's a wild idea because there's nothing intuitive about it. Like inductively, if you were going through the world and things got really, 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 really bad, there's no part of you that's going to know that you shouldn't just give up, right? There's no part of you that's going to get you kind of through that dark night of the soul and up on the other side where you might be stronger for it, right? What is it? Nietzsche said, great suffering makes great. Right? And I think everybody that's really worked on something that's not easy, like running a series, you know what I mean? Like that you guys are doing here, like there's long nights, there's difficult conversations, there's financial considerations that come into play, there's like opportunity costs of other things you could do. Like anytime you're doing something that you care about and that matters to you and that you're gonna get good at it, it's gonna get tough. And so when it gets tough, how do you share with your kid? How do you share with future generations that this is kind of a feature, not a bug? Like, yeah, there's going to be lots of this. Get ready for it. Get used to it. Get comfortable with it. Actually learn how to navigate through the chaos to come back out into a more ordered situation and maybe bring some more order into the world with you from kind of that underworld journey that you go on. So that's the monomyth, right? Like, so I guess what I'm making an advocacy for, I'm advocating that we continue telling the monomyth. Like, that's super important.
Yeah, that was really good.
God knows it's helped me in a couple of situations, and I'm sure you too. I'm sure anybody who's come to any maturity in their life is kind of been on that hero's journey and kind of gone into the place where it was tough. And it's good that there's people there shouting at you, no, it's going to be all right. You're going to be cool on the other side of this, trust me.
I think a lot of what you just said is incredible to build up resilience in life and to teach children that. But, you know, there have been so many studies now done on if there isn't a figure around the kid that helps them learn about resilience, then the likelihood that that kid falls into the underworld, into the chaos, is actually quite high.
Really?
You got to have either a parent or a mentor or a counselor or another family member, relative, or close friend, or one of those that at least makes what you were discussing, all of that resilience understanding, like help the child understand resilience and how they'll come forth as a stronger, more solid being.
Oh, that's beautiful, isn't it?
Ron, what did you pull up?
This is the Rosetta Disk.
The Rosetta Disk.
This is the Rosetta Disk, and I believe this is the version that was landed on Comet 67P in the fall of 2016. So do you remember that comet? Shaped like a rubber ducky?
Huh.
And the European Space Agency sent one of these up with the Rosetta mission.
That's cool.
They called long now and said, would you like to put a Rosetta disk on the Rosetta mission? And they then crash landed that little probe onto the comet. So this version of this disk is sitting on Comet 67P somewhere outside of Mars orbit with all of human language on it. So it's an off-planetary backup of everything we need. So, yeah. As you can see, it kind of starts in the big languages, kind of spirals around, so you follow it with your eye, right? It says languages of the world here, and then it kind of spirals around until you're down at the nanoscale. And like I said, those pages of language documentation end up being about 5 human hairs wide each.
Who owns the rights to that? Are we going to get in trouble for using that image?
No, I think you should be totally fine with that.
Great.
I can double check for you, but I think you should be good.
Nice.
I mean, again,
because it's your design.
In long-term archiving, there's an idea called locks. Have you heard about this?
Locks.
Locks. LOCKSS. Lots of copies keep stuff safe. So there's this idea that the way to get this information to the hands that it needs to get into in the year 7,000, 8,000, whatever, right? The way to get it into the hands is just to make sure there's tons of it, make sure it's everywhere. So I think having another appearance of this disc here on your show is a totally good move.
Yeah.
I think the rights holders will be okay with it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, good call, Ron. Can you pull up the clock? Do you have photos of the clock from the long now?
There are some interesting videos of the clock installation that are up on Twitter.
Okay.
So there's some new videos of the installation. There's some beautiful photos of the mountain floating around our website and stuff. But yeah, there's some stuff. It trickles out. I mean, it's a long-term project, and it's kind of always been handled in this really patient, really measured way, where they've never said, here's the opening date. We need to have it done by that day. They've never said this is, the details that have been released have been the details that are like, this is the story. This is the myth of the clock, so.
This reminds me to talk about this.
Yes, absolutely.
Bristol Cone Pine, longnow.org, established 01996.
So Bristol Cone Pines, do you know about Bristol Cone Pines?
I've heard of them.
They are the longest living non-clonal organisms on planet Earth.
Longest living,
That is the prototype clock that I believe is currently in the London Science Museum. That turned on at the turn of the millennium. So Y2K was happening. I was in Chicago in my basement, probably panicked, holding batteries and water and everything, getting ready for the end times. Yeah. And the Long Now board was turning this guy on. So this is beautiful. It's kind of proving out a concept, kind of checking it. The actual clock of the Long Now in Texas is significantly different in its design and in its kind of form factors, but I think the general idea behind it, the way it goes about keeping time, is very similar.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, it's pretty. And see, you can see the reed there we were talking about.
Yeah.
That's the reed in the star field, and then around it on the outside there is the Gregorian. So there's like a dial there that'll let you know what year it is. But yeah. And I wish I knew more about reading the reed and could tell you like exactly what the history of that is in astrolabes, just the way we would read star fields. But
reading star fields for time.
Yeah.
Huh. So, Ron, do you want to get a zoom on the coin?
On the coin. Yeah.
So Carpe Millennium. Seize the millennium.
Seize the millennium.
And then there's that same.
Yeah.
What'd you call it?
A RETE. R-E-T-E, for anybody out there who wants to look into it.
A RETE.
Yeah.
And then on this side is the.
That's the Bristlecone Pine, yeah. So the original mountain for the clock is in Nevada. It's just outside of Great Basin National Park. It's Mount Washington. That was going to be the original site, and the top of that mountain, at like, I think like 11, 12,000 feet, is the largest privately held stand of bristlecone pine trees in the world. And some of those pine trees are older than the pyramids of Giza. They're thousands of years old.
1,000-year-old trees?
Yeah.
Wow.
I think there's one actually in California that might be up to 5,000 years old. It's absolutely mind-blowing. Well, I got to spend some time out with them last summer, and it was a special moment.
Multi-1,000-year-old trees would be really neat to be with.
Yeah. It's like our spirit animal.
Yeah.
Our bristlecone pine.
Is Long Now a spirit animal?
Yep.
Is now what's the story behind these coins?
So that's a challenge coin. And so for
Challenge
anybody who
coin.
doesn't know what a challenge coin is, we talked about this a little bit earlier. A challenge coin is military in origin. And in the branches of the military, if you wanted to express gratitude or camaraderie with somebody who is maybe like not at the same rank as you, there's really not a whole lot of appropriate ways for you to kind of bust ranks and express gratitude, nor is there a way for you to kind of express gratitude in a concrete fashion across branches of the military. So there's a great 99% Invisible podcast with Roman Mars about challenge coins. I send it to everybody when they get one of these. I'm like, you got to go listen to this. It's like 20 minutes in a nutshell. Here's the story. But you'll have high-ranking generals who behind them in their offices just have like brag sheets of all the challenge coins they've collected over their career to kind of show how cooperative they've been, like how helpful, how many friends they have in all these different places around the world and all these different branches. So challenge coins are kind of a thing. There's some interesting, probably apocryphal stories about people who brought challenge coins to the bar. And you pull your challenge coin out and you call coin check and you throw it on the bar. And everybody else has to pull their challenge coin out and throw it on the bar. And if they don't, the person who doesn't have their coin on them buys the next round of drinks. So you can try that at the bar. You can try that at the interval, see what happens. Maybe you might get somebody who pulls out a challenge coin on you. And then it's on you. So that's the story behind those. And yeah, it's a nice little artifact we like to share.
So a challenge coin expresses gratitude across ranks as well as across fields.
Yeah.
And so then would a field in maybe like some field in Southeast Asia, someone that's doing some sort of work in Southeast Asia, would they have a same challenge coin that somebody that's doing work in South America would have, or they would have different challenge coins, but they would be able to gift their different manufactured coins to each other, right?
I think the idea is that you generally mint them from your own money. Like, it's not like the military has a budget for challenge coins.
Yeah,
My understanding that people will just go get them made. And so you get as many coins made as you have people who want a challenge coin for their group, for their division. And so you are now holding our challenge coin.
The Long Now challenge
The
coin.
Long Now challenge coin. There's only one.
Seize the fucking millennium, baby. Let's do it. And that's...
Woo! Is that our 15-minute signal?
Fucking this.
That's our 15-minute signal. Give it to us, Ron.
Yeah, stand by.
Stand by, because I want to hear it. I want to hear it. Here it is.
That's how you know you have 15 minutes left?
15 minutes.
All right,
Yeah,
that's
all right.
great.
And then the
Then out comes the timer.
hourglass comes out. Yeah.
All right.
Oh, except it's a 15-minute glass. Interesting. Hourglass
Yeah.
is actually named after an hour.
Yeah, I guess I never really took the time to think about that either. But that's a great timekeeping device, right? We've been talking about
15-minute glass.
ways of keeping time and ways of conceiving
Yeah.
time. Hourglasses or 15-minute glasses, quarter glasses,
Yeah.
are such a good way of really starting to feel time.
Yeah.
Like, I'm sure you probably are very familiar with the feeling that gets when it gets to the bottom. You're like, okay, I got to wrap this question up.
I'm getting better at it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and so it's an
Yeah.
interesting device to help you kind of understand where you are.
Yeah.
And we're in that business. We're in the business of the opposite direction, getting you to understand where you are in the broadest possible terms. Like, you're in the middle of a 20,000-year narrative.
Yeah.
So you don't
Yeah.
have to rush. You got time. You can pass the baton. You can
can
start a
pass the
project without
baton.
feeling obliged to finish it. So I think it's a really
Yeah.
important concept that we don't have incentivized in
Yeah.
our culture a lot.
We're talking about time? Oh, I'm sorry. We're talking about time?
You chiming in for time, Ron?
Well, the whole time thing has always been, because I understand the past, present, future happening all at once. I understand it doesn't, and I'm doing the best I can to, navigate through this world in 3 dimensions. But yeah, the whole time thing. After this show, I'm going to take a drill and drill it in my head.
I'm doing my best to navigate this 3 dimensions. What is that?
I brought you something. This
This is
is
gift number 2. Look at the amount of gifts that are happening.
this is a single malt scotch.
Let's drink
It's
it
part of a
now.
long-term thinking scotch program at the interval.
Oh, wow.
If you've seen the ceiling, there are some bottles that are hanging over the bar, and those are the donors that have helped us construct the bar and keep it open. And
cool.
in order to kind of express our gratitude and then also
Yeah.
kind of get in this cool tradition was the idea of the bottle keep, which is a Japanese tradition where you keep your bottle in the bar. And so St. George Spirits in Alameda, which is arguably the best distiller in the world, right? They're just total craftsmen, total pros. They distill in the eau de vie tradition. They make a single malt for us. They made 15 barrels, and every year we cork another barrel So this is 3-year. I thought I'd bring you some 3-year for you
Wow.
to try. Are you a Scotch guy?
We really appreciate
And it's not
it.
technically a Scotch because it's made in Alameda, not Scotland. So I think it's
Can
just
we
a
smell this?
single malt.
Also, Ronnie, you want to grab a little glass for yourself as well?
Are you going to drink some?
I'll
I
have
think
a little.
we should.
I'll
I
have
think we should enjoy a little bit
sip.
here while
I'll
we
have a little sip,
run the last 15 minutes here.
Yeah, I don't. I typically don't drink, but when I'm presented really nice, I can't even believe you brought your own fucking glasses.
I did. It was the last thing I thought before I left the bar last night. I was like, you know what? I think it'd be kind of nice for us to have a sip of Scotch on the show. So.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
badass. Oh my
All
God.
right.
Let's do it, Ronnie. Wow. A toast
Wait a
to.
minute. Make sure.
Are you on the center shot? Okay, cool. So, interesting.
Yeah, I'll do it.
A dab will do you. There you go.
So let's take a little whip. Wow. Holy cow. That smells real.
Well, it is.
Yeah.
Scotch, isn't that's the high end of whiskey? No, it's
Yeah,
Scotch.
it's made from a single malt, and this particular one again has been aging in wood for 3 years. But that
Wow.
same booze is going to be aging for 15 years. So every year our bottled owners get to kind of try the next version of it. So, but yeah, we're on year 3. It's my favorite of the bunch. And
I want to make this to the Long Now, everything that the Long Now has done in the way that they inspire long-term thinking around the world, to you guys and to society prospering and flourishing.
yeah, here. Cheers.
Cheers.
I forgot about the dead. Or whatever it is. Why do we do that, Nicholas?
What's that?
Why do we touch before we drink, we could tap
The wood?
on the table?
That's a good question. I have no idea what the story is there. There's got to be a good Long Now story about why people will tap the table, but I think it's just a habit I've gotten into.
You know when you, I think that is right. You do the wood for the.
Woo!
For depth.
That's
Yeah.
nice.
Yeah, did you shoot that?
Yeah, he did.
right.
He. That's Ron though.
That's the way to get into it. There's more here if you'd like some more. So
Yeah, and then what are we doing later? What do you got, somewhere to be at 11?
yeah,
This is really interesting for someone that doesn't put alcohol on their taste buds. Like it feels really real, you know,
Yeah.
and it tastes really good.
well, I appreciate you joining me on that one. Hopefully I didn't put you too hard on the spot there.
No, we had David Hua here from Meadow Cannabis as well.
Yeah,
I don't do cannabis either, and so when he had an edible on, we both had one as well. So whenever our guests bring things that we don't eat or drink, or Ron does it all, but I don't. But I always pay the respect to what it is, and this is fantastic. I mean,
Yeah, we need to get Tony Montana on the show.
what's that joke?
Oh, you didn't see Scarface? The big cocaine dealer. Never mind.
Oh, I get it. All right, let's run Nick through a couple of the simulation questions on the way out.
all right.
Yeah, before we get in trouble.
What do we do with the concentration of wealth in so few, and then the exacerbation of the wealth inequality due to technologies, biotechnology, space colonization technologies, AI and robotics, cryptocurrencies? What do we do about that growing gap of inequality?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it's one of the more important questions we can be asking ourselves, right? So I'm happy to answer it. Again, not speaking ex cathedra for Long Now. I don't think Long Now has a position on this kind of stuff, but I'm happy to talk about it. My personal take on it is that it's the kind of, if we're asking ourselves how much inequality is too much inequality, right? That's a tough question to answer for everybody. Like for me to answer for everybody, right? And there's this interesting thing that we have the ability to kind of kick that question down to individuals to figure out what feels right, what seems appropriate, right? And so when we think about wealth inequality and technology and how is it exacerbated, well, imagine that you're working on a technology, and imagine your technology is going to drastically increase the amount of wealth inequality in the United States. How do you feel about that? It's a question you should be asking yourself, right? And these ethical conversations we've been talking about, this opening of spaces, this kind of creating an aperture for questioning to happen and thinking and conversing to happen is really important, because if that's your role, you should be having those conversations. Someone should be talking with you. You should be thinking about it with yourself, talking with yourself. Go for a walk in the woods. Because you have to come up with some kind of modus vivendi. You got to come up with a stand. You can't even not take a stand, right? Like, it's one thing we have to do is, even to not take a stand is to take a stand, right? And so you're going to take a stand, but so is every one of the other 7 billion people on the planet, right? And so if you're in a position to influence that, you got to think about it. You don't have, you have a responsibility to really kind of reflect, meditate on it, and find the right answer. And the nice thing about, and it's really a dodge on my part, right? I'm dodging the question by saying, I won't answer that. I won't say how much inequality is too much inequality. I think we all know there's a lot of inequality, and it's problematic, right? I walked here through Market Street to get here, right? This is San Francisco's kind of like heartbreaking wound, right? Is Market Street, and then everything that we're talking about now, right? Having a delicious single malt scotch, right? So these things stand in stark juxtaposition, and there's a certain sense in which, those of us who are in a position to do something about it.
Neil Peart.
What's that?
That's in the lyrics of the Rush song by Neil Peart in regards to free will. Even if you don't make a choice, you still have. If you choose not to choose, you've still made a choice.
Yes, Rush, philosophically woke prog rock band.
Thank you. Thank you. I was dating myself there for a bit.
No, man, that's such a good song, and I wish I knew the lyrics off the top of my head, but I know exactly what you're talking about, and I couldn't agree more. So, again, in a certain sense, I'm kicking it off and dodging the question, but in another certain sense, I actually think that's the appropriate level of abstraction. It's like
how much wealth inequality is too much wealth inequality for every single person. It's different. So,
well, it's more just like we don't make decisions that way. Like, there's not like a wealth equality meter that I can just go here and say, oh, here's what I think, right? Like, I think it's actually like to ask the question. I think it's an important question to ask, but the more you think about it, the more you go, oh, wait, maybe that's not the question I should be asking myself, is how much wealth inequality. Maybe I should be looking at other things that I'm doing, other ways I'm acting as an agent in a system that's either creating wealth inequality as a secondary effect, like not like I intended to, right? Like, you can do stuff, you can have an impact on something without
secondary effect.
Yeah.
Matt Dillahunty was just on the show yesterday, and he basically said that rather than having the super poor be here and the super rich be here, we need to just do this and make it so that the gap between the super rich and super poor is just much, much less, but there's still this room to grow and innovate and create an impact. But the baseline needs to go up much faster, but keep the ceiling going up at the same time.
Yeah, that's a good answer. But it's people that are going to do this. It's individuals that are going to do this.
Yeah. And
they won't have a slider. They'll have to just go out in the world. They'll have to wake up on Monday morning and go, okay, cool.
I don't know if the way that this is going to come to here, I don't know if this is going to happen benevolently or malevolently.
Oh, I don't know either.
And I actually have a tendency to think that it's going to be ugly.
Thanks. Yeah. Thanks for saying that. It's about time we could agree on something with a little touch of darkness in it there.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm glad you're aware of that. Yeah. That there's bad days ahead.
Yeah. Just take, like you just said, take a look at Mid-Market Street. A decent amount of people that we know that have either been on the show or that we talk to, totally off the record their names, of course, but they have a tendency to think that it takes a lot of resources to invest this to come up to here. Is it worth the resources to invest into human psychology, mental stability, physical stability, and wellness? Is it worth the time and the resource to do that? We've heard that before.
Is it worth investing?
It's a lot of time and money and resources to bring people up from the very bottom to at least the middle or the middle upper. And why try and teach the old horses new tricks when you could just birth new horses that are already way up here that you can train to be even better horses? You can just kill off.
Yeah, but dogs. Well, it's dogs. You don't treat.
I've got to say that we're not talking about horses, right? We're not talking about killing anything off, right? We're talking about human beings. And that changes the calculus, I think, right? Well, and again, like
that was what I was
getting at, yeah.
Using a horse, though, just as an analogy, but
yeah, but I think that's some of the way we structure the way we're thinking about it is actually the stuff we should be thinking about. So it's less, I guess, like I was saying before with the slider comparison, right? Some of it's think about the question, and some of it's think about the questions we're asking. And ask ourselves like a meta question: is this the question we should be asking? Is it really? Yeah. Is it really a question we should be asking? Is like, is it worth it to invest in people? Is it worth it to invest in other people with which we share a neighborhood, with which we share a country, with which we share a planet? That's an interesting question. I think we have to take a stand on that. Do you think it's worth it? But then let's also talk about like what is it we're really talking about, right? Because we're not just talking about demographics. We're not talking about some 10,000 units of something, right? We're talking about individual human beings, and I think there's really strong arguments there that like that changes the way we should ask the question. So that would kind of be my answer. Is like I think we should take that question and everything around it. I think we need to take that back to the woodshop, all of us collectively, and really say like, are we asking the right questions? Because I don't know if the answers we're getting from the questions that we've been asking, because you've been in San Francisco for how many years?
6.
Yeah, and so I've been here for like half that time, right? For like 3 years. And all the questions we're asking, like the questions haven't changed. The answers really haven't totally changed a whole lot either. There's kind of like a bottleneck logjam kind of thing going on, and I think we can think about it better. And again, this becomes conversationally mediated. It becomes reflectively mediated. So
I'm interested to figure out how to ask the question better and to get more conversations rolling around the world about it, because just the general increasing that bottom and decreasing that gap, but continuing innovation and creativity through onward in the future is.
Yeah, well, you're having a great conversation. Like you're opening the conversation with the show, and that's amazing. And if you're asking lots of people this question, I think you're probably hearing a lot of interesting things.
Totally.
So that's awesome that you're doing that.
Do you want a little more?
No, I'm good. Okay. Thank you, though. Appreciate it.
So I have another question. Is do you think we're alone in the cosmos?
Alone, short answer is no. Short answer is absolutely no, like hard no.
Do you think there are advanced civilizations roaming the cosmos?
That one I don't know, because again, like the question itself is like, what are we looking for, right? Are we looking for civilizations like us? Are we looking for carbon-based life forms? Are we looking, you know what I mean? Do we consider technology to be a marker of advanced civilization, or is a species that's avoided the technological question altogether, are they doing a tip-top job?
Are we going to evolve in 1,000 years to have eyes, like you said?
Yeah, what is this, and it's an interesting question. I think, again, it's like one of these provocative questions that gets the juices flowing. It gets the words out of me, and then gets the words out of you, and we're swapping perspectives, and we get to talk a little bit. And I think that's really important. But I don't know. I don't know what we're going to find when we're out there. I'm glad people are listening.
Do you think we're in a computer simulation?
Yeah, so my answer on that one is mostly that if we're in a simulation, obviously these things nest, right? So statistically speaking, the argument for, I presume your viewership is familiar with the simulation hypothesis, right? The argument is that like, oh, you're in a simulation, but that simulation could have been seeded from inside of another simulation, right? And so you can go down this like ad infinitum, and all of a sudden like you're just in, it's turtles all the way down kind of thing, right? And so the real important question that I think we should be asking about the simulation is less, are we in one or not? Because we've already said by setting up the hypothesis that we wouldn't know even if we were, right? So are we in it or not? And does it change the way you behave? Does it actually inform or instruct the way you act in the world? Do you dwell in the world differently if you think it's just a simulation?
The more I talk about the simulation, the more I want to advance civilization to the point where we can make a simulation. So that's one thing, and then it expands people's minds to new dimensions of thinking as well.
Yeah.
Does it change your behavior on a day-to-day basis? No, probably not. We don't know. It's just a thought, but probably
it seems to be the latest and greatest.
It does change the way you think, though. It expands your minds to new dimensions, so I guess it does
change
your behavior a little bit.
That's a good question.
Yeah. What do you think is the most beautiful thing in the world?
Oh, man, that's a good question. The most beautiful thing in the world. I think, I think that look that people give me when they hear about the clock and it's the first time ever. I think that's my favorite thing in the world. Just seeing like that human experience that just draws out all that empathy, and just like kind of like you can just tell there's like fireworks going off in someone's head. I love that feeling. When you're having a conversation, when you ask me a question, I'm like, oh my God, what's the most beautiful thing? That's great. Like that kind of connection, that ability to kind of poke somebody at a deep level and like really kind of open up something with them, I think is a really beautiful thing.
Yeah, hell yeah, that's a good one. What I think Long Now probably talks about this a decent amount, but how do we work together across the borders of the world?
Yeah, God, man, again, like I don't think I have the authority to come up with a good answer for that, right? How do we, do that? I think again, like I think individual human beings figure that out in your own small way. I think I forget which sutra it is, but it's the Buddhist idea of like, you keep your golden link in the chain shiny. It's your responsibility to use that golden link, right? And I really think that's the case, right? Like I think our world kind of moves on individual people doing really wonderful, amazing things. So I think, what do? I don't know, I'm here talking to you. I'm sharing this information for the show. I'm working for Long Now. I'm having conversations about the future and what we should be doing. And that's the move I've got. That's my link in the chain.
That's your link. Yeah, this is our link. And as we typically say on the show, find your link. We don't say it that way, but we talk about you guys finding your link and keeping it shining, keeping it golden, keeping the link strong with the other people around you.
You guys use that on the show?
That was our first time we used the link.
That's awesome.
That was the first time we used the link. We usually say that if you had a good time, share the content with other people, and usually what we tell people is, furthermore, go build something with the content. So if you got inspired, go build something, go write something, go create something with it, go talk to other people about it. Comment below with your thoughts, give us a like, give us a subscribe. Check out Long Now, there are links in the bio. Go find Nick online as well, his links in the bio as well. Reach out to him, get in touch. Thanks everyone for tuning in, we greatly appreciate it. Also, if you had a good time, help support us on Patreon. We're trying to sustain this studio and grow it and grow our impact out, so join us there. Much love. Nick, thanks so much for joining us on the show.
Having me. Really
what a
appreciate
pleasure.
It. Oh, absolutely.
We have a lot more great conversation, great impact to keep coming.
Yeah.
The So Awakening, Rosetta Project, Extinction, the clock, the interval, the Manual of Civilization, all this amazing work that you guys have done, and we're going to keep amplifying and impacting. Ron Vargas, our producing director and partner, thank you very much. Much love, everyone. Peace.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This is so cool, man. What a great setup.
Thanks. Let's figure out how we can do it more closely with Ron.